So welcome on behalf of the Art Center. It is our 25th anniversary this year. You can imagine among the many disappointments of what's going on with COVID, it has been disappointing to the Art Center because we had a lot of big celebrations planned. But in the meantime, we might start up in September. It looks highly doubtful, but in the meantime, we are offering whatever we can in online events like this. And we're lucky today to have Thad Kubis, master photographer, teacher, mentor, known quite well around New York and the Berkshires. Thad teaches at IS 183 at Ollie. He did a great workshop for us in person last year, well attended on smartphone. And this year, this workshop today is the first of two parts, focus on controls. It will cover all sorts of things. Again, it's a Zoom meeting, so there'll be probably a few glitches, but hopefully we're in business now. And Thad, if you want to take over, please go ahead.
Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for attending. I'm assuming you could all hear me, which is the first thing we want to do. And you could all probably see a screen that should be a whiteboard right now, okay?
No, we don't.
All right.
We don't see.
No one's seen, you see, okay.
We see that you've started screen sharing.
We see you.
It's the whiteboard.
Right, it's taking a while.
Okay, did you see it now or not? How about now?
Now, yes.
Yep, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I had hoped, I've got this brand new iPad Pro, which has been, the last 2 days has been a real problem using it, but in any case, I'm going to try to use the whiteboard. So today, we're going to talk about controls, and it really doesn't matter what kind of camera system you have, whether you have, and you can see that, you can probably see this on iPhone, or you could see if you have an Android, or if you have a DSLR, or if you have a film camera. Most of the controls that we're going to talk about are adaptable or used on all of these systems. They just have slightly different names. Also, if you want to ask questions, my suggestion is use the chat function or raise your hand, and we'll try to answer questions as we go along. Or if you want to hold it until the end.
We lost you.
You lost me.
River is running the Sandisfield.
No, now I have you. Okay, sorry.
All right. So if you want to ask questions, raise your hand. There's a little raise your hand icon, and then I'll try to get to that question, or send me a chat, which I'm going to put up right now. And if, there we go. And then if not, at the end of the session, I will gladly be online for some time longer to answer more detailed questions. So, okay. So today, digital cameras have literally revolutionized the ability for everyone to take wonderful photographs. And you have a couple of different options to deal with. So for example, if you have a Nikon, a Canon, a Sony, an Olympus pen, nearly any digital camera today, you have a dial, usually on the right-hand side, that has a bunch of controls on it. And one of the controls it's going to have is going to be, let's see if this works, it's going to be the letter AV. It may also say TV. It may also say P. It may also say D, right? Those are a set of functions that allow you, oh, it also is going to say M, that allow you to take pictures using a very complex software. But there is an easier way to take photographs using modern cameras, excluding iPhones or smartphones, which I'll get into. And these are what they call scene or preset controls. So you might see, for example, on your camera, and again, if you're looking at a camera, your camera may have, you guys can see this or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got my camera. Yep.
Okay. You may see on the right-hand side a dial or a screen, or on the back a screen, and on those screens you might see icons. One of the icons you might see is a portrait. It's the side of a person's head. Another icon you might see is a tulip or a flower. Another icon you might see is a sun setting or a sun rising. Another icon you might see is what looks like a mountain. Looks like little zigzagging. You might see an icon of someone who looks like they're running. You might see an icon of a moon. You probably, depending on which camera system you have, you're going to have at least 5 or 6 of these, and on some you may have as many as 15 to 20. What those icons offer is a very simple and fantastic way of using your digital camera system to the best of the camera's ability, to the best of your ability, without having to learn all of the intricacies of manual exposure. So if you look at your camera, has anyone found any of these scenes? Let's say the tulip is usually the first one they see. Okay.
Yep, I got it.
I'm going to go down.
I have it also.
You do? Fantastic. So I'm going to go down the line and talk about these scenes, what these scenes mean in general. So first of all, if your camera is a digital system and you haven't upgraded your camera software recently, it's called firmware, you may want to look into doing that. And if you shoot me an email, I could send you some basic instructions. Because what happens is digital cameras are constantly updated on a regular basis, and that update expands the scope of what you could do with the camera. I'll give you an example. Last June, I taught a series of classes at Tanglewood. The first class was in April, and a guy who came to that class had a Sony camera, and he had 5 preset or 5 scenes on his camera. But at 5th or 6th class, when he came back, he had 12 because he updated his system. So these camera systems are like your smartphone. They are constantly able to be updated. Okay, so one of the first icons you'll see is the icon that looks like a tulip. It's a flower. And what that does is that allows you to take close-up shots or flowers or any type of close-up shot you want without really modifying anything but setting the scene. So on the dial camera, you dial your control so that that icon is marked next to the little chit or arrow that's on the camera. If it's a screen on the back of your system, you would highlight that screen and press set or go, and it will lock that in. That gives you the ability to take very, very, very fine quality close-up photography without having to worry about all the intricacies of that. On smartphones, I don't know how many of the 13 or 14 people have smartphones with them, but on smartphones, you have that same function. In an Android or a Google phone, it's listed in the Pro section, and on Macs, you just have to go in and just pinch your fingers and get very, very close to the camera. What this automatically does is when a camera is getting very close to something, traditional digital cameras only could get as close as about 24 to 36 inches. So it's like this far away, right? And then anything closer than that is out of focus. When you use the icon for the tulip or the flower, you could get, depending on the camera, as close as 3 or 4 inches. So it's pretty impressive, right? So for example,
Yes.
go ahead. Is there a question or not? Okay. So for an example, I'm using my iPhone right now. I could go right down to I am now about 2 inches above the keyboard, and everything is perfectly sharp. If I did that with my digital camera without going to a macro lens focus, it would be out of focus. Also, what happens is when you're using something very close like that, you want the background to be blurred. And that background being blurred is called bokeh. Bokeh allows the background to become uninvolved in the photograph and only what's in the foreground to be very sharp and very visible. So what happens is when you use that function, it literally drops the background out of focus. So in many cases, what you'll see is a very beautiful rendition of a flower, a coin, nearly anything that you want to get close to. I know someone who uses it for fabric design. You'd get a really beautifully exposed close-up image of that using the macro or tulip or flower icon. It also does something else. When you're that close to an item, the exposure gets a little bit strange, and the computers and your cameras have been designed to counter that. So instead of you having a photograph of an item that may be too bright or too dark, the ability is that using this icon, it allows the metering system to adapt itself for being close up. So anyone have questions on that? Does that all work for everybody? Yeah.
Yeah, Thad, I have one question.
Sure.
Now, on the
No,
smartphones,
it's great.
is there a certain, if you have an iPhone 6 or 7, or are some of these features may not be on there?
So
Or is that,
no, so what they are is if you own a non-Apple phone, so here's I have my Samsung
okay,
Note, right? There
Yeah.
is in the camera section, if you go to your camera icon,
okay,
you're going to see, let me just open this up. You're going to see when you activate the camera. Where's my camera? Where's my camera? It's red. It's red. There it is. Okay. There is a series of icons along the top that move back and forth or go up or down, or you
okay.
get this button called More, and when you get to
Right.
More, it says Pro, and in the Pro section, I have super close up. I also
Okay.
have some other functions, right? So depending upon the system. Now with a Mac, you would literally, with an iPhone rather, you would just zoom in as much as you can, and you will get to see how close you can get. You can literally get about 2 to 5 inches before it's a problem, depending on the phone you have. The newer iPhones like the 10, the 11, the 11 Pro Max allow you to get to about 2.5 inches before they get out of focus. That answer your
Okay.
question? Yeah?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
So the newer ones have multiple cameras on them too, so.
Well, yeah, the multiple cameras are used in part for the portrait mode and some other functions, but
Okay.
the idea is that these cameras today all have the ability to do extreme close-ups. And also, if we're going to talk about this in the next session in a couple of weeks, but in composition, you can use these as a creative tool as well, okay? So that is what I call the macro setting, right? So you saw that coming up. Another setting is portrait. Now, portrait's unique because portrait, you may have a couple of different portrait modes on your camera. It's not unusual to have a portrait mode that normally usually it looks like a person with a hat on or a person of a profile. That's your general portrait mode. You may have another one that has a portrait, that same icon, but it has a half moon up in the upper left or the upper right hand corner. That is to use when you're taking pictures at nighttime. And the third portrait mode may be what looks like a baby being cradled. That is when you're photographing portraits of children. Now on an iPhone from iPhone 7, except for the version, one of the 8 versions up until today, you have a mode called portrait that automatically allows you to get a portrait mode set up through an iPhone. The same thing occurs with Android and Pixel phones or Google phones, but they don't often call it portrait. They call it sometimes modeling, or they call it photo shoot. And what this does, a beautiful portrait is normally a portrait that the person's head is at a certain size in relationship to the area of the viewfinder. And the background of that is somewhat out of focus, and that's what portrait mode does. Portrait mode automatically changes the lens from being a distance lens to a sort of a close-up lens. The background will drop out of focus. And if you have those functions on your phone and you want to try them when we're online, that's great. Otherwise, definitely run through these functions each time, because you will see that when you're taking a portrait of a person, what will happen is the head will be much larger in the frame than if you didn't use the portrait function. If you're taking a photograph of someone at nighttime, what will end up happening is that facial tones, rather than being dark, will become fairly bright, and the camera has been designed at the time to compensate for the darkness to emphasize only the skin tones. And with a baby, what often happens is, for a young child, the flash is disengaged because flashes can be blinding to young kids. Also, young children have a different complexion in their skin. So what ends up happening is the camera has been designated to render that correctly. So just between the macro and the portrait, you have expanded your capabilities with the camera, but it doesn't end there. Okay, that's so far good for everybody?
Mhm.
Okay. One of the other modes you might have is a mode that looks like, it's called landscape. And what it looks like is, it looks literally like a couple different triangles, like mountains. So traditionally, if you look at fine art painting from the Renaissance, you'll notice that as the distance of a landscape goes, hello? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, as the distance in the landscape gets further and further, the image gets a little bit more blue, because that's because of the light. Landscape, or this mountain type mode, has been designed to allow you to get an extremely accurate exposure over a large area. So for example, the picture behind me, right? That was taken at 4:30 in the morning in Monument Valley, Utah last January, minus 16 degrees, and that was done with my iPhone. And I put it in a landscape mode, right? And what it does, it extends the focus. It measures the entire viewfinder, where other icons will only measure areas of the viewfinder, and it gives you a very, very balanced exposure. So landscape is a very, very powerful tool to be used. Now, it is best used on a day like today when we don't have ultra bright sun, we have some clouds in the sky, the sun is way above us, it's not in front of us, it's not behind us, so you can get a really great landscape photo. Also, most of your cameras have an automatic function called HDR. And you'll see that on smartphones, on the iPhone, and on the your DSLR. What HDR means, it means high dynamic range. And what high dynamic range means, it extends the tonal range that the digital sensors can accept to give you greater and more detail in the color. Sort of like what my virtual background, that sunrise, that gradation up is because it's high dynamic range. These are functions that are, again, automatically controlled in your system. For my smartphone, I have to put HDR on. So you also have another version of landscape, which I'm going to call, let's see, what do they call? What do they have? A couple of, oh, backlight. So backlight is an icon, and the backlight icon varies. Sometimes it has a person with the sun directly behind them. Sometimes it has a couple of people with the sun behind them each. And you want to take a photograph of someone in front of the setting sun. If you did that using your camera's controls normally, what would happen is the person in the foreground's face would be very, very dark or silhouetted. But when you're using backlight, the camera automatically measures the difference between the subject and the background and allows the subject to be visible. That all clear? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Some of you, on some of your cameras, may have an icon that is called Silo or Silhouette. And what that does is that allows you to take these incredibly beautiful silhouette shots that were once very complex to do. So for example, if I wanted my face to be darkened and I only wanted my form to be seen in front of the background sunrise, I could set my system on silhouette, and what it does is it basically allows the background to be dominant and drops everything in the foreground into black. So if you ever want those really cool looking silhouette shots that you see in motion pictures, or you see what professionals use, you have to find the silhouette mode on your camera and set that up. Silhouette is also could be used when suns are setting, suns are rising. If you're on a cruise ship and you've got the ocean behind you and you got this big blue sky, and you want that person in the foreground or the shape of the ship to be in a darkened mode, silhouette would be the one to, or silhouette would be the mode to use that. Am I moving at a good speed? So far, is everything okay?
Mhm.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Then you might have another mode. Yes. What? Nope.
I don't think I can't find the backlight or silhouette on my camera.
So what
The
camera do you
nighttime.
have?
Sorry,
Okay.
that's my dog.
So, yeah, what camera do you have?
I can definitely find a D3200 Nikon.
Okay. So not every camera, as I stated at the beginning, not every camera has every function or every scene mode. But one of the ways that you could find out is you can go to the Nikon site, and then you
Right.
could ask, or you have your manual, check the manual and see if they have a preset scene mode for silhouette. If not, go to the Nikon site, go to the support area and send them an email and ask them, because what will happen is they will probably tell you that your firmware needs to be updated. And one of the advantages of cameras today is that firmware update will allow you to get additional features for the camera. So my camera,
Great.
this camera is the Canon professional version, and what they do is they are constantly
Yes.
updating. So this has gone from being a fairly sophisticated camera to a very sophisticated camera just by firmware updates.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't have it on my
That's great.
my Canon digital SLR either, that icon, but yeah.
Again, it is not on everyone. Sometimes
Right.
it is called backlit. Sometimes it is called sunrise, sunset. Sometimes it is called foreground. It really depends. But it is
Right.
a really
Okay.
cool tool to play with, because again, you can create some incredible imagery without having the extensive knowledge of exposure that you once needed. Okay.
Terrific. Thank you.
Okay. You may have another. Icon that looks like a rising or setting sun. And rising or setting suns are, to take a photograph of a sunrise or sunset, it is a fairly difficult exposure, because depending on a lot of things, you either have to massively overexpose or massively underexpose the image. What this does, these settings read the entire picture, determine where the brightness is coming from, and then calculates an exposure based on the light that it receives. So it's a very sophisticated tool to create an automatic sunrise and sunset that is, quite, to be honest with you, it's professional quality, and it's all been structured in this. Now I'll show you later on how you could do that on your own, but these are some of the icons that you could use. You may have another one that looks like a star, and it may contain the moon. So, for example, today, a real big popular thing is to photograph the stars. And people have problems doing that because it's not the easiest thing to figure out. Well, you need a filter for many cases. You need a very, very fine quality lens. If you dial in your star or moon, and sometimes there's two. Sometimes there's a star, and sometimes there's a moon icon. If you dial into the star or moon icon, what it's going to do is the camera is going to, again, using software, set it up so that you'll get the best possible nighttime shot you can. Now, you'll need a tripod, or you'll need what I call a beanbag that you can aim your camera up. But what this will do is this will give you the ability to get some of those stars tracking. You've seen where you've seen stars going around in a circle. You'll get to see an incredible detailed moon. And again, it is a tool that up until recently was relatively difficult to utilize. But with these presets, it works quite well. You may have one called fireworks. So you're 3.5 weeks away from the 4th of July, Independence Day. And what a lot of people want to do is they want to take pictures using their smartphone or their DSLR for fireworks. So smartphones have the ability through an app that you could purchase that is called Fireworks, or it is called Camera 465, I think it is. And it allows you to take really great fireworks imagery. But there are some other ways you could do that as well. So on my Samsung, I have a fireworks icon that when I set that when I go to my Camera Pro, I hit the icon, It's looking for intense bright light against a very dark background. And I don't even need a tripod to make that work. Fireworks on many of these systems here does essentially the same exact thing. What it does, it allows you to take pictures with or without a, I'm just trying to find a note here, you go, with or without a tripod, and you'll be able to get some really good shots of fireworks. Okay, so let's see. I'm just going down my list here. So you have another one that is, it's a fairly new one called Party. And Party, what it does is it allows, if you have a group of people in front and a group of people behind, or just a bunch of different people in a room, it sets the focus up so that as many of those people will be in focus as possible. Now, smartphones automatically have a very large, what they call depth of field. So if you're taking a party photo with your iPhone or with your Samsung, that's an automatic function. But with a DSLR, oftentimes the front or the back will be out of focus. But in a party mode, what it is considered the main subject is crisp and clean. Party mode also may or may not activate the flash. It's going to make a determination as to whether or not the area behind the camera is too dark or too light, and it's going to compensate with a flash mode. So what these systems have done is they've literally taken away the ability, again, as I mentioned earlier, to understand the really complex structures of a DSLR, and you can take some excellent photos of that. One of the tests that I suggest is that you go out and you find the scene, landscape, whatever it may be, front of your house, whatever you want to do. You take the picture on the automatic mode, which I'll explain later on, and then you shift to one of the presets that match your mode. And you'll see there's going to be a significant difference in the way the camera registers the imagery. You may have another one that is called Sport, and newer cameras have words versus icons, or they have both. Sport is normally shown as what looks like a person running, literally like someone's running like this, right? Now what that does is that sets the shutter speed, which is what captures motion, at a speed that will freeze action, which means that if you have someone running or a horse running or a car going around a track and you're on the sport or the movement mode, it's going to freeze the action of that item to a limited degree. What it also means is that it is dominating by the shutter speed, meaning that the camera is always going to look first to stop motion. So kids jumping in pools, people playing sports, cars, let's see, well, airplanes in the sky is a little bit different, but you have things like horse racing, I mentioned car racing. Any sport will stop the action, and you'll get a fairly sharp image of the person that is moving rather than that soft blur that you can get when the person is not using a sports scene mode. Is that all right? Everyone understand that? Mm-hmm. Yep, okay. You also may have a mode called slow-mo. Slow-mo does the opposite that the sport mode does. Slow-mo literally slows everything down. So instead of getting a sharp image, you're going to get a soft blur. So for example, if you're at a waterfall, I was at Bash Fish Falls last week. Bash Fish Falls got this great drop of water. If you set your camera to slow-mo, what will happen is it will slow down the water. So the water, instead of looking like water moving down, it looks like a stream of almost a ghostly like ribbon. And that can be used not only, so if you're at Saratoga, well, you're not going to be there this year, I guess, but if you were at Saratoga, the racetrack, and you're on the rail and you're capturing the horse coming across the finish line, well, you have two ways of capturing that. The first way, you capture it with the sport mode and freeze that action. The second way is you could capture that at that horse so that the motion is blurred. You'll see it's a horse, but it's just going to be enough out of focus that you're going to be able to see that there's movement involved. And that's a very unique and a very, very beautiful tool to use for a lot of reasons. Rivers, streams, people. If you're in a busy scene, years ago when I was in Milan photographing the Duomo there on a project, I couldn't get people out of the picture. And then I said to myself, you know what? Why don't I just use my slow-mo function, which was manual at the time. And what I did is I set it up so that the people became a blur and virtually none of the people were visible were visible at the end of the photograph. So slow-mo is a mode. Now, on an iPhone, it's called slow-mo. On a Android, it's called slow motion. So you have those capabilities on nearly every phone that you own. The next one is called hyper. Hyper is opposite of slow motion. So in slow motion, if you're on an iPhone and you took an iPhone photograph of me moving and did on slow motion, when you replay it back, I'm going to be literally slowing down. Now there's no sound, but I'm going to be literally moving, slowing down. In hyper, what's going to happen, it's going to take a fairly long segment of time and compress it down to a very small segment of time. Usually it's about a 10-to-1 relationship. So if I was photographing something for 30 minutes, it's going to compress that down to 3 minutes. So I don't know if any of you are gardeners or are into horticulture, but horticulture this is a tool that is extensively used. I work with someone in Connecticut in pre-COVID-19 days that she has 8 or 9 iPhones in her greenhouse, and she has them set so that they are photographing over a 20-hour, 24-hour period, and she's watching the flowers literally bloom. And then what she does is she plays those back in about 5 minutes. Instead of seeing this, she sees the flower bloom in about 5 minutes. So it's a pretty cool tool to use. And again, it's available on most cameras, but if it's not, I could explain later on how to update your camera system to do that. Let me see what else we have in my list of things here. And then I want to focus. How many people are using iPhones or smartphones only? You got like 13 or 14 people on board. How many people are using smartphones only? No? Okay. Because smartphones, night portrait, night scenes, party portraits. Okay. There's a couple other ones too. There's one that is called, this is a fairly new one. It's called Aquarium. What Aquarium does, it allows you to photograph fish in an indoor aquarium without getting that blurry, misty look that normally occurred when you photograph in water. Now, if you have a waterproof case for your camera or for your smartphone, and you use this when you're diving, it is a unique concept. It's relatively new. The technology to eliminate the blueness of the water and to eliminate that smokiness of the water is less than a year old, so it's a fairly new one. So if you have it, Aquarium is a cool tool to use. Another thing you have on many of your DSLRs, and you have on nearly every one of your smartphones, is a thing called filters. What filters allow you to do is, let me give you some examples. Let's see. Filters, there we go, filters, okay. All right, so filters, for example, on my smartphone, and this is common on nearly every smartphone, and it is becoming more and more common on newer DSLRs. So I've got a filter that says original, which means if I took the photograph, there's no modification to the photograph, it's going to look like I had just taken it as I wanted to. But if I wanted to, for example, make the picture warmer, meaning adding some yellows and reds, there is a mode called Vivid Warm. There's also a filter called Vivid Cool, and there's also a filter called Vivid. And what that does is it intensifies a certain segment of the colors within the image. So, excuse me. So the camera reads an image and says, oh, there's a lot of yellow in here. Vivid, we're going to punch up the yellow. Or if there's a lot of red, it'll punch up the reds. And you have 5 or 6 different, well, in my case, I got 12 different settings. I got one called Dramatic, which increases all of the colors at an equal level. I've got one called Dramatic Warm, which takes that intensity over the entire scene, but leans more to the yellows and to the reds. I've got dynamic cool, which does the opposite. It brings it more to the blues and to the greens for the coolness of it. And then I have the ability to take black and white filters. So most of your digital cameras photograph only in color, and as do most of the smartphones. But they all have the ability to photograph in black and white, and it's normally called, there are 3 different black and white modes. There's one called, the base one is called mono, meaning monotone. So it produces a traditional black and white image, which doesn't have rich blacks, it doesn't have rich whites, but it has a very, very beautiful rendition of gray. It will also have a function that is called Silvertone. Silvertone is a relatively new, 3 or 4 years old version of black and white, and what it does, it emphasizes the grayness, but it adds a bit of shine. They call it Silvertone, and the picture looks more metallic than it does if it was going to be used as a monochrome. And then there's the one that I like the best, which is called noir, like in film noir. It emphasizes the blacks, it emphasizes the whites, but it doesn't emphasize the midtones as well. So if you're a fan of film noir movies, you'll see that those movies usually are very, very deep. They have dark, dark black shadows, very, very bright, and they have limited midtones. Noir does that for you. So you could take literally any photograph that you're about to compose, shoot it in color, shoot it in black and white, either as you take the picture, or in editing, you could later on, you could eliminate the color from that. So far, so good?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So does anybody have on their camera systems any icons that I haven't gone over?
Hold on. I'm on the Canon digital, and there's the CA mode.
CA?
Yes. There's a
Okay.
dial for C on the dial.
So, and this is the Canon or Nikon you said, Sharon?
Canon.
Okay. So, in addition to, on some of the more sophisticated digital cameras, what they have is, and I'm just going to see a setting. Let me just check something out.
Okay.
What they do is they give you a series of customized settings, and some of them are C's and some are CA's. CA means it is a custom automatic intelligence exposure. So what that basically does, and I'm going to give you their exact definition, it's called Creative Auto. And Creative Auto uses a fairly sophisticated technology. Well, let me explain it another way. There is a system that came out last year called Arsenal. And what Arsenal did is Arsenal basically had about 500,000 different photographs stored in a library. And they were categorized by a variety of scenes. And when you were taking a picture in the Arsenal mode, the camera would search that memory bank for a picture that was composed and exposed similarly and modify your camera's exposure to match the image on file. So what Creative Auto does, it is a more sophisticated way of taking exposures, and it usually provides a rendition of the image that is better than if you did it with almost any other tool. Now, Canon has it called CA. Sony has one called AI. Nikon has its own name. I'm not really sure what Nikon's name is, but Nikon has its own version. So it's a really cool tool to use because it's using artificial intelligence to create a better exposed photograph. So what they say here is that it provides the photographer with the ability to adjust a multiplicity of settings that are going to be based on reading the camera's image and the recording quality. So for example, if you were in your normal automatic mode, you can't do anything, right? Mm-hmm. All you could do is take the picture and it's going to be rendered. But in the CA mode, you could change all of the aspects, and I'll get into those aspects next, of what makes an exposure, and then you could actually add creativity to that. And what I'll do is at the end of this class, I'll share my screen with some photographs that I have taken, and I'll show you some imagery that use these techniques, okay? So for example, what you have, let me get over here now, let's see. Exposure is made up of three things. It's made up of the ISO, which I'll explain, the aperture, and the shutter speed. Every camera you take, every photograph you take uses all three of those in a variety of percentages. When you're in the auto mode, which is on your camera is either going to be an A or a green box or a green square or a green letter A, right? And spell green wrong. What that means is your camera is making all the decisions for you. There is nothing that you can do to affect that photography unless you change the mode. Up until recently, you only had these other modes. You had P, which is sort of the professional version of CA, but P means programmable. Programmable means that I could change any one of these individual elements, ISO, aperture, or shutter speed, any way I want, and then the other two would change automatically. With the CA, Sharon, what that does is it allows you to change all of those, and it uses internal software to make the better photograph. So it's a simpler way of using a manual function, but it's not as great as manual function.
But there's, when I do the, in this one though, it has, when you have it on CA though, on some of them, some of the functions, it says not selectable in this current mode. So it does let you change some.
Which ones?
Well, let's see, the autofocus, white balance I'm hitting. A couple of them I trying to get in. That's the only thing I'm trying to figure out how to change all the little things on here.
So normally in CA or in programmatic mode,
Yeah.
the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed are changeable. Everything else is not. Okay.
Oh, that's right. Okay. That's where I gotta go. Okay.
Okay. So you mentioned
all right.
you mentioned something. Does that answer your question, Sharon?
Yes.
Yep. Good. Okay. If I don't call anybody else by their name, I'm sorry. I know Sharon's face, so and I can't see your names on my gallery view. Okay. So one of the things that Sharon mentioned was white balance. So many of you have probably seen this little button on your DSLR called white balance, WB, or AWB. Our eyes automatically adjust from looking into the sun, from looking into a house, looking back and forth, or looking in a dark area. Our computer-like brain automatically renders the light in the correct color temperature, so we don't see differences in color as a digital camera does. And a test too, if you want to run a test, put your camera on auto, put your camera on manual or on P, press your white balance button and change the white balance. White balance is an icon-based system that has a couple of different white balances. So here, let me get rid of these things here, and I'll explain what white balance does. You have a thing called AWB. AWB means automatic white balance, which means that the camera is going to read the temperature of light. Light has temperature. It starts at around 200 and it goes up to around, I think it's 15 to 20,000 Kelvin. Daylight, noontime, is around 7,500 Kelvin. So what your digital camera does, it automatically reads the white balance as, oh, blue sky, no clouds, bingo, I'm going to set it to AWB. But you also have the ability to change that to sunlight. So the sunlight icon is normally a sun that has little like rays coming from it. And that changes the dynamics. For example, is someone crunching paper? Yeah, good, thank you. With automatic white balance, the range of white balance is from 5,000 to around 7,000 Kelvin. When you go to sunlight, it narrows that down so it's a more accurate reading. Now, you may not see the reading, you may not see the difference on your screen and on your back, but you will probably see the difference on your screen at home or if you get a print made. So you have sunlight, you have a thing called shade, you have a thing called cloudy, a little white balance called cloudy. You may have one that is called incandescent. You may have one that is called fluorescent. You may have one that is called shadow. Yep. You may have one that is called custom, and you may have one that has a K. And you may have other ones as well. Some of the newer cameras have multiple versions of all of these. Automatic white balance, as I mentioned, reads the picture as it is today and gives you a perfect rendition of color. Sunlight, if you're in an area where there is really no clouds and you want to get a more accurate color rendition, dial in your sunlight, press set, and then you're done. If it is a shade, if you're in the shade, like in the woods, walking around where there is no direct light coming down to you, shade emphasizes the darkness and emphasizes the blues that are normally in shade, and you'll get a little bit more color rendition photograph. Cloudy runs in a way that if you have the sky right now, the sky where I am in Sheffield is about 95% blue. But this morning it was about 80% clouds. Once the clouds are the majority in the sky, I change my white balance to cloudy because it does make a difference in the way your pictures are going to be coming out. If you shoot inside, automatic white balance will give you a great photograph. But if you really want to get a nice effect, if you have fluorescent lighting, change to fluorescent lighting. Now, fluorescent lighting, what it does, it eliminates the green that fluorescent lights normally transmit. And the same thing with incandescent. Incandescent are the screw-in light bulbs, not the light bulbs, the new ones that have fluorescent tubes in them. We're looking at the old ones that have the little glow rod on the inside. They are highly yellow, and incandescent eliminates that. If you're shooting in a deep shadowed area, as I mentioned, or that's deeper than shade, you have a shadow mode, and you have custom modes. Custom modes, if you shoot in a specific area a lot and you don't want to keep on changing it around, you could do a customized white balance setting, press custom, usually it's called custom 1 or custom 2, and it remembers that setting, and you could actually give it a name. You also have a setting called K. You could actually, using an app, the app is called, hang on, I'll give you the name of the app. Anyway, what the app does is the app actually allows you to set, it's the new name, it's called Light Spectrum Pro. And what it does, it measures the actual temperature of the light, and you could dial that in to get a highly accurate rendition of color. Now, if you want to see the example of that, go take a picture outside on automatic or inside on automatic white balance, then change your white balance to incandescent, change it to fluorescent, change it to cloudy, and photograph each of those differences. You will see a very unique difference in the way color is rendered. And I'll give you an example. A bunch of years ago, I was hired to do a photographic project on church steeples in New England. And the art director was very specific. He said, I only want the church steeples, and I don't want any special effects. I said, okay. So I'm not the greatest person to listen to anybody, but so I said to myself, well, you know what I'm going to do? As I go through these towns, I'm going to photograph the steeples with different white balances based on the time of day. And it turns out that the white balances changed some of the colors of the steeples from pure white to tints of blue, tints of purple, tints of yellow. And when the art director saw that, he thought it was the greatest idea in the world and used them. He took all the credit for it, of course. So if you want to see a unique concept when you're using with white balance, take that same picture with different white balances. In some cases, it's grotesque. For example, many times people's face turn different colors, but in other times it changes the sky, or changes the greens, it changes the blues, and you'll see a very, very unique picture. From a creative standpoint, I play with white balance all the time. Matter of fact, I don't know if you can see this or not. So this is my, I'm not sure you can read that screen, but this is my white balance spectrum measurement. So it's telling me now that my camera, my white balance in here is roughly 4100, which is very yellow and very, very red. And it's probably because I got a lot of sunlight and I got fluorescence behind me. So you could literally use white balance for a creative function. That all clear?
Mhm.
Yep. Now, if you have a Samsung or a Google phone, you have an automatic white balance function that is adjustable to the same terms and icons I mentioned here. If you have an iPhone, you have to download an app that will change the functions. As a matter of fact, if you're using an iPhone, I know many of you are not, and you want the iPhone to be much more camera-like, there is an app, let me just find it because it's fairly new. There is an app called Camera Pro, Pro Camera, by the way, Pro Camera, that converts my iPhone into all the controls that a sophisticated DSLR camera has. So this camera now, using this app, allows me to change white balance, flashes, a variety of other controls. There is another an app called Pro, what is it called? Let's see. It's called 645 Pro, and that, I'm sure you can see this, that literally turns my camera into a DSLR with all of the controls that a DSLR has on the screen that transferred over to an iPhone. So if you're not interested in getting a DSLR, if you're only interested in using your phone, there are two apps, 645 Pro and Pro Camera, that can turn those into cameras. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, okay, let me answer some questions. Just show you. What is a beanbag? Hold on, I'll show you. Okay, so I'm back. So I like to take pictures low to the ground. And my tripods, which I have a variety of different tripods, some of my tripods can get me low to the ground. But this is a beanbag. What I've done is I've taken an old pillowcase and I fill it up with 5 pounds of rice. And then what I'll do is I'll just tie it up so the rice doesn't come out like that. And what I could do is I could then take this and I could put this anywhere I want. And I could then put my camera on the beanbag, and the camera, I don't know if you can see this or not, the camera is literally on the beanbag, and the camera basically sits in the beanbag and holds it steady. I use it because I like low to the ground shots. And sometimes low to the ground shots, I don't want my camera to be put on wetness or whatever it may be. So I use a homemade beanbag, right? Okay.
Great.
Okay, so let me see. Erin says thank you for the wonderful information. She has to leave. Okay, I'll try to put together a cheat sheet on this, and I'll send the cheat sheet out to Hildy and to Barbara, and then she can forward it to everybody who attended. Okay. Okay. All right. So that takes care of questions. All right. So, in general, any questions at this stage of the game? Okay. So you also have settings in your camera that are either on the dial or on the screen, depending on which system you have. And one of them is going to say AV. AV means that you are taking control of the camera, but you are only controlling the aperture. The aperture is the amount of light that is let in through the lens, right? And depending upon your camera, you either have a button on the front, a dial on the front, or a dial on the back, where you could literally set the aperture. And setting the aperture, and again, I'll show you some examples of that in a little while. Setting the aperture allows you to control what is in focus and what is out of focus. There is a technique called selective focusing, which means you focus on a very small part of the picture, open your aperture up wide, and what ends up happening is everything outside of where you focus is in this beautiful out of focus softness.
That
The piece you're focusing on is sharp.
In the old terms, was that the f-stop?
Aperture is f-stop. So aperture and f-stop are two terms that are used interchangeable. F-stop means a physical number. Aperture is just the scope of it. Yes, it is the same. Okay.
I can't seem
Now,
to find this on
what camera do you have, Barbara?
question. It's an Icon D3200. I'm
Okay,
looking down at it. I do not see. Okay.
So Nikon uses different terminology, which they're now changing. So you may only have an A or you may have an F. You see an A or an F?
I do. Yes, I do have an A. It's in the brackets with MASP, but there's an A there. And on
So
back of this camera,
probably-
there's an LV.
Is a what? An L?
LV.
Oh, LV. Okay. LV, do you have a TV or do you have a letter S?
I have the letter, let's see. Yes, I have the letter S as in Sam.
Okay. So on Nikon cameras and on early Sony cameras, they decided to go against everybody else that was out there. So instead of AV, some cameras have LV, some cameras have F, usually
Okay.
a small f, and you'll see in some situations, some cameras don't have TV, they have the letter S. So S means shutter. Shutter is what
Okay.
captures motions, and in some cameras, LV is aperture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now nearly
Thank
all,
you.
yeah, now nearly all cameras have that same function. If you're
Great.
using a smartphone or well, any smartphone, they now have this tool called depth effect. And depth effect allows you to change the aperture that will increase or decrease the items that are in focus or out of focus. Now, when you're in one of these
Okay,
separate modes, like AV or TV or S or LV, you only have control over the tool that mode controls. So the camera is going to determine what the sensitivity of the meter is, and it's going to determine any of the other two functions. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to, let me talk a little bit about, no problem. Let me talk a little about ISO. So your digital cameras, bless you, whoever sneezed, your digital cameras have something that is really unique. You have the ability to change the ISO for every shot. And what that means is you have the ability to change the amount of light that the meter is going to read every time you take a picture. If in the old film days, a roll of film had anything you want. ISO is really cool because ISO actually, the lower the number, usually it starts with L1 and it goes to, then it go up into numbers. The lower the number, the more light needed, the higher quality of the photograph. The higher the number, now my camera goes to 52,500 ISO, which means I could literally shoot in the middle of the night, right? But the problem is, the higher the ISO, the less light the camera needs to create an image, but the more noise or the more disturbances, we used to call it grain, you'll see. Your cameras, if you set an ISO, if you leave the ISO on auto, it will determine how to set the ISO based on the current situation. So that's a really good tool to use. But if you're shooting someplace where it's very, very bright, you could downgrade your ISO, or very, very dark, you could upgrade your ISO. Street photographers tend to use an ISO of 400 to 800 because that gives them the greater range for them to shoot in a normal bright day. Now, you could set ISO a couple different ways. On some cameras, there's an ISO dial. Some it is built in the screen, and you'll see it goes from L1 to L2 to L3, then it starts at maybe 50, 100, 200, whatever else. It essentially doubles each time. Doubling doubles the amount of light, halving halves the amount of light. So if you're shooting at 400 and you go to 1600, you went from 400 to 800 to 1600, you're now allowing the meter to be twice as sensitive to absorbing the light. So ISO can be used creatively. You'll see that in the second session of this in a couple of weeks. Okay, aperture, as we mentioned before, is the amount of light that is let in by opening and closing. And shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter opens and closes. Now today I'm using a physical function. Today they're electronic shutters. But what they do is the lower the number, like 1/30th or 1/50th or 1/15th, the longer the shutter is open, so there will be some blur in the photograph. The higher the number, like 1/250th, 1/500, 1/1000, it's going to be sharper and it's going to allow less and less movement to be shown. That all clear? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So, anyone have any questions at this stage of the game? We'll take a 5-minute question break, then I'll go into some of the more functional things. No questions? Fantastic. That means I'm doing a really good job, or you're all ignoring me, watching Facebook now. Okay, all right. So you have some other tools on your cameras, right? So many of your cameras have on the side of their lens a thing that says AF or MF. What that means is that is autofocus and manual focus. And basically what that means is very, very simple. It allows you to control the focus by dialing your camera, or it allows the camera to control the focus, and the camera uses infrared or UV to focus, ultrasound rather than UV, ultrasound. And the way it works is simple. If you were photographing at night, unless you're in the nighttime mode, the camera is never going to find focus in the darkness. Because what the camera does is the camera needs a very, very sharp item to measure the distance using ultrasound or infrared. So if you're photographing something at night, or if you're photographing something and you hear your camera going zit, 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 that means it can't find focus. So what you could do is you could literally change your autofocus to manual focus, and you could override that. Now, again, depending upon which camera you have, you may have a thing on the side, a button on the side that says stabilization. Stabilization does not eliminate motion. It eliminates some of the camera shake. So if you, for example, are taking pictures in a very cold atmosphere, your hand's shaking a little bit, stabilization will eliminate some of that shake. I always keep stabilization on, just in case. Now, some of these modes, the manual and automatic mode or the stabilization mode, are on some cameras in the back of your screen. Depends on the camera. Okay. Depending upon what kind of lens you are using, you probably have a lens that is called a zoom or telephoto lens, which means it usually has a number, let's say 25 mm to maybe 75 mm, or 18 mm to 200 mm. That gives you the ability to zoom in or zoom out on an image and changing, that's called the focal length. Changing the focal length, which brings something closer or something far away. There are lenses that only have one focal length that are called prime lenses, but zoom lenses have become the tool for everyone to use. You could either set your zoom lens to a physical focal length, which is usually marked on the lens, or anywhere in between. And I suggest after you get, maybe if you have a chance today, is to put your camera on auto and photograph one at your lowest number zoom, and go to every notch number. So normally might be 25 to 35 to 50 to 70 to 105 and so on. And without moving the area you're aiming at, you'll see what happens is the larger the number, the closer the item becomes, but also the flatter it becomes. It tends to compress the image. It looks like things are on top of each other, which is a pretty cool effect. Also, in most cases, the longer the telephoto lens, focal length you lose, the more jiggling or the more motion is going to be seen in the image. So the normal rule of thumb is once you're at about 100 millimeter focal length, you want to consider either using a beanbag or a pillow bag. You want to be somewhere where you can hold the camera very, very still, or you want to mount the camera on a tripod. Make sense? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So you might also see, let me get rid of these here. Your camera has a very, very sophisticated light meter. And what that light meter does, it measures light that is coming through the lens that is within the frame of the sensors. But it is called an averaging light meter, which means that it measures the light across the entire area. Most of your cameras have the ability to change that reading from an overall to what they call the spot. So is anybody into wildlife or wild bird photography?
Yeah,
Well,
I do bird photography.
All right. Well, Sharon, it is Sharon,
Yeah.
right, Sharon? Yeah. So
Yes. Yeah.
if you are in the woods and you are on a meter reading that your camera is measuring the entire frame, the chances are the bird or the animal is going to be darker than it normally would be, and you're not going to get the detail that you want, right? Because the camera is reading the entire scene. If you set your meter to spot, so normally you see your camera measures about 90% of the frame. With a spot meter, it measures around 4 or 5% of the frame, maybe in some cases 10 to 20%. But if you put that on the bird or the animal, you are now getting a reading just on the animal, which means the background is going to be incorrectly exposed, but you're not there to photograph the background, right? So normally you have an averaging mode. Gotta spell it right. An average. You may have one called. Let me see. Each camera has a different terminology. We have center weighted. Some have evaluative, and some have spot. Average measures the entire frame. Center weighted measures the center of the frame. Evaluative measures specific areas within the frame, and spot only measures where you are aiming the camera. So if you're aiming the camera at a bird and you got this bright sunlight in the back of the picture, the bird is what's going to get measured for metering, and it's become much more accurate. And nearly all your cameras could change that as well. If you're using smartphones, Androids, and Samsungs, Samsung's, Androids, and Google phones have the ability on many of them in their Pro section to change the area that you're reading a meter on. Where a smartphone, what you have to do is you have to hold your finger on the item that you're photographing for 3 seconds, and the yellow square appears. And next to the yellow square is a slider that allows you to adjust or increase or decrease the amount of light falling on that subject. Metering is always a little bit confusing. Everyone understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, so what I'll do is I have a cheat sheet for digital DSLR. I'll send that cheat sheet. Barbara, I'll email it to you, and you can email it to everybody who participated. That work?
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So I'm going to try to show you some examples of some of the tools that we use. All right. So bear with me while I find my photo, one of my files. So far, was this all helpful to everybody? I mean, it's a lot of stuff. There also is there's going to be a test.
It is a lot.
Good. There's going to be a test after this. Let me just see. Where is it? 20. It might be in May. Canon. Let's see. April. Okay. All right. So I'm not exactly sure what we're going to see here. I'm going to try to open them up, and I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, so let's see. I do. Let's see, share screen. Okay, why isn't it showing me my share?
We're seeing you.
You're seeing me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yes.
wanted to see this. Well, I might be able to do it this way. Let's see. You still seeing me?
Yes.
Yes.
All participants who can share. Oh, I know what I may have to do. That's good. Oh, so you're not seeing anything, huh? Huh.
Yeah.
Why isn't this working? All right, let me figure out. There we go. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so
Yep.
here you go.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
do that. Good. Let me just
Wow.
rearrange this. So this is a shot from my front yard that is stars, and you'll notice there is a little bit of, let's see, there's a little bit of movement. If you can see the star right here, right? But this is done with a camera that is on the nighttime setting. So basically, this is I think this was Venus. My son and I were out photographing it. So you basically could photograph the stars pretty well, pretty easily by just going to a nighttime setting and putting it on a bean bag or a pillow bag or a tripod, and you get a pretty nice shot out of it. Something else you could do.
Nice.
Now, remember I mentioned the slow shutter speed? This is called light painting. Light
Yes.
painting is when, and this is sort of fun to do, particularly outside, but you could go to a darkened room, put your camera on slow-mo or on slow shutter, and you could literally dance around with lights, and it will only capture the lights for the amount of time that the shutter will remain open. So you could create some extremely dynamic photographs like that. So this is me with a red headlamp on and with a white blue light in front of it. So these are slow-mo shots. So the shutter is open for a long period of time. So what's ended up happening is the imagery, the camera is seeing all the movement of light. The most famous picture of this is Picasso. Picasso did this painting where he actually created a painting and he was able to sell it. So that's with a slow motion or a slow shutter speed. And again, on your iPhone, you have that capability. On Android, you have that capability. And depending on what camera you have that capability.
Thad, there's
Okay,
a question
so
in
this
the,
is-
That's great.
there's a
Yes.
question in the chat window.
Go ahead.
I don't know if you want to wait and take them all.
No, let me see. I'm not seeing the chat window, but let me see. Hang on, here we go. Okay, chat. I'm taking pictures of my daughter playing sports. Okay. So the question from Roberta is, she's trying to take pictures of her daughter playing sports using the autofocus mode, which is good. Is there any tips for using sport? So my suggestion would be is Roberta, is set your setting on your camera to what looks like a person running. So what kind of camera do you have, Roberta?
I have the Canon, I believe it's a Rebel, Canon
Okay.
EOS Rebel T6.
Excellent camera. So the T6, is it the TI6 or just the T6?
It just says T6.
Okay,
And I have two lenses with that.
Okay, so depending on, well, let's talk about settings. One of your presets should look like someone running.
Yes, I've tried to use that. I just it doesn't seem to work as well as either the zoom or the regular lens with autofocus, and I don't know what I'm doing
Well,
wrong.
okay, so first of all, there are three different parts of this picture. Autofocus has nothing to do with the preset setting.
Mhm.
It does have something to do with the lens.
Okay,
So for example, you have a 75 to 300 millimeter lens, right?
yes.
Without being there with you to play with it, my suggestion is set it up for the sports function and then try to keep that lens at around 150 to 200 millimeters. Because what might be happening is, even though you're on autofocus, when you're extending the lens that far, any movement is going to make it go out of focus. So
Gotcha.
you may want to get a tripod that has a universal head that you could literally, the camera, it's called a floater, the head will float around with you, so it eliminates the majority of the picture which would be out of focus. That may be your problem.
Okay, so you said, what was the highest I should go on zoom, 150?
Well, if you're not going to use a tripod,
Yeah.
you want to keep the zoom between 150, 135 and 150.
Okay,
If you're going to use a tripod, then there's virtually no limit to how long the lens could be used.
okay, thank you. I'll try
Okay,
it.
all right. So here's a shot. This was taken down in Chesapeake Bay down at the end of March. This is where I used the sunset mode. Normally, my camera would have read this and said, "Oh my gosh, this is so bright," and it made everything so dark. Here, it just computerized. Look at this, the detail on this I guess swamp grass. Look at the detail in here. That is using one of the presets. So here's the close-up preset. The close-up preset, you notice how this is perfectly in focus, but all the way in the distance here, this is all out of focus. My eye, our eyes, goes to things that are sharp. And it sees this, and it ignores this at first. And then after it gets bored, it starts to go around. Now, if you look at this closer, look, can you see how sharp that is? You can actually see the break in that leaf. And this is, again, using the tool that is the macro tool. Okay, so this is a photograph of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge at sunrise. But the picture to me was so boring, I decided to shoot it out of focus. So I took my autofocus off, put it on manual focus, and I spun the image around until it looked like that. So you can control what you want to focus, what you don't want to focus. Also, many of your cameras have a button on the back or on the top called LV. LV means live. When you press that button, what you're seeing in the screen is actually what the camera is going to capture, and you could adjust or you could increase or decrease the exposure, and what will happen is you'll see that in the screen itself. So it's a cool tool to use. Let's see. Okay, this may be, I think this might be Bash Bish Falls back in January. So let's say. So you'll notice how the water here is not as sharp as you would think it would be. This is because I used a slower shutter speed and I blurred some of the water. So with slow shutter speed, I'm trying to see if I got a better example of that. With slow shutter speeds, you could actually increase the blur of items. This might be even better. This is definitely, maybe these are not Bad Fish Falls. Yeah, so you see how this is now becoming more ribbon-like? It's streaming, right? You can see it's not getting larger on this. There we go. Yeah, let's see. So you see how in here, get rid of that. You see how in here there's no detail of the water? It all looks like ice. That's because I use a long shutter speed. So when you're using one of your slow shutter speed settings, you could actually get this effect. It's actually quite beautiful. Let's see what else we have.
Yes.
Let's see. So when I teach in New York City, I take the 5 o'clock train out of Wassaic. This is using the night setting. So you'll notice this is fairly well exposed, right? Got nice detail here, got nice detail here, and I even have detail here. So the night setting can be very, very effective depending on where you are. I'm just going to go to some other ones. So this is using my pillow bag. I didn't want my camera to get stuck in this mud. This is in Rhode Island. So I put my pillow bag down. Now I have a large plastic bag that I put my pillow bag in so if the bag doesn't get wet. And I put my camera literally right on the level of the water. That's a pretty cool, and then you see this is in focus and this is in focus. This is because I had great depth of field, meaning that there's a huge amount of area in focus. And I'm going to talk about composition in the next session, and I'll actually be walking around where I live using the tools. Just compositional. Let's see. Here's an example. This is an example of white balance set to daylight. So this day that I was in just back in February, and maybe in March when I violated the curfew, but this shows you, this has a very nice rendition of color, right? It looks like a beach. Here is one that I shot with using a different white balance setting. See how green everything is? It's really not a very great picture. This doesn't look like a beach that any of us would know of. This is just depth of field. I'm going to try to find one that's selective focusing. Let's see. We'll talk about that next week. We don't do it now. Here's a shot using the nighttime setting of the full moon back in February. Now, you'll notice it's out of in the shutter, but that's a picture. It's a haunting type picture. Here is a shot using the nighttime setting of the moon. Now, 10 years ago, this would have been difficult to do. Today, you set your night shot, put your camera on a tripod, and you could get a shot that works pretty well. Let's see. No, I'm trying to, reflections. Close-up using a close-up function, but let's see. So here. So when I took this photo, this is in the keys, the meter is reading up here, the light meter here and here. So you notice this entire image is well exposed, right? But then on the same token, let me find another one. I may not even find another one. Let's see. I gotta find, oh, here we go. On another one here, the meter was set only to read a small area. So it read this, you notice how I got this pretty silhouette? So using different meter settings, you can really change a lot of the impact of a photograph. Let me see what else I have in this. Let's see, this is a series, another one. So this is a wider view. So the other photo I shot of this, I was looking at it in a vertical aspect ratio, meaning the camera was turned this way. Here I shot it with the camera turned this way, and you can see what it does. Now, metering, again, metering was set up here so I could actually get a better meter read of this, because that's, to me, was the important part. Again, you can take pictures of nearly everything. I'm just trying to find some. I don't know if I have any selective focus ones here. Let's see. Maybe not. Okay. Okay. Let's see. You all can still see me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we've got about 10 minutes, 8 minutes left, 7 minutes left, whatever. So any specific questions that I can answer? Any specific camera related that I didn't cover on your camera or smartphone? Let's see, Roberta, you got the answer one for you.
I missed the first part. The first half hour of the
First half an hour. I think
quiz.
this is being recorded. It is. So
Oh,
I think
I was wondering if I could.
Sorry.
That was my question. I was wondering if I could get a copy of it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a copy going to be available on the Sandisfield Art Centers.
We'll be posting that within the next week or so.
Okay, excellent.
And we'll email people who are here today.
And I'm going to give a cheat. I'll send a cheat sheet out. Probably I'll send it to Hildy or Barbara later today or tomorrow, and that will cover a lot of it we went over. Not in the order, but a lot of it in the same function.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Any questions? Erica, Dan, Dana, Gwendolyn, any questions? Nope.
Yeah, I've got one.
On this, oh, sorry.
So who?
Oh, okay. I got one. Just the A-depth setting on the Canon.
The A-depth?
A-depth, yeah.
So more than likely that's the aperture, right?
Yeah.
It's an aperture setting. So
Okay.
you could, for example, if you were going to be photographing, and then I'm going to try to find selective photograph. If you were photographing something at a, here, let me just see. Okay, this might work. Let's see. Let's do share screen again. Yes. So tell me when you see this.
Yep.
Can you? Okay. So what do you see? You see this fence, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a shot where there's maximum depth of field. This post is in focus, and that silo is fairly in focus, and even the distance mountains are in focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what we call total depth of field. So I use a very, very small aperture. Another image I'll show you in a minute once I find it is the opposite. So A depth may give you the ability to set the range of depth. So it might say, I want all my photographs to be in total depth of field, but others I want to be in slight depth of field. You'd have to experiment with that, but that's what I believe it means.
Okay.
Somebody else have a question? So I'm going to try to find another image. Okay, hang on. Let me find another image if I could find one. So this is a little bit different, but if it ever opens. So this is using the close-up function on an iPhone. So what I've done is I got my camera and I got as close as I could and I enlarged it and I could get it. See, this is a sort of pretty unique model. It reminds me of 1969. But you know, this is
Peter
all
Max.
really cool stuff that you could a very, very Peter Maxis, yes, extremely Peter Max. And let me see if I could brace pixel images, probably. That's not, let's see. Nope. Okay, 2 on the lake. What's 2 on the lake? Nope. All right, I'll find some other ones. Let's see. Oh, you know what it is? If you go, let me just, there we go. This should be it. Yeah. Can you see this image?
Yes.
This is selective focusing. You'll notice this gear right here is the sharpest element and everything else is out of focus. Selective focusing is a very, very cool tool to use. And in many cases on iPhones, you have this thing called portrait mode you could use. On Samsungs, you have this thing called depth effect. But on most cameras, if you open the aperture, the AV, the f-stop, to its widest number, which is normally a decimal number like 3.5 or 2.5, and you focus on the specific item, everything outside that focus point will be soft focus like this. Pretty cool technique, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
One quick question, Thaddeus, please. So that photo that you had on the beach in Rhode Island, I guess it was of rocks and the beach itself.
Yes.
You said you put it on your beanbag. So can you tell me what like setting you took that on? I know that it's was it the shutter speed you were working with, or,
yeah.
or
So
what?
there's a couple things. First of all, I shoot everything on manual, and manual is something that you literally need a lesson in itself.
Yep.
So what I would have done is, I'm not sure I'll be able to find it quick enough. But so when you have a photograph that has such depth of that, the meter is reading everything. So first thing I do is I decide what do I want to be the correct metering. So for me, it was the rocks right in front. So I probably took a meter reading, and I have to check my notes. I probably took a meter reading on the foreground, and then what I probably did is I adjusted the exposure to be a little bit darker because I like richer, what they call data-rich digital files. So I probably underexposed it a little bit. Overexposed a little bit to get more detail in the front. So I don't remember which one that was, but so I measure it out. Also, sometimes when I'm on shore, I carry a handheld meter, but all your cameras have a system called bracketing. Bracketing allows the camera to take 3 to 9 different exposures based on the exposure that you determine, and it varies those exposures. It varied those exposures based on an f-stop or 2. So, for example, if for example I wanted to take a shot at sunset and I really wasn't sure about how well that was going to come out, I would set bracketing up and I would say, give me 5 shots that are a half a stop apart. So I'd get a range of images that all have a moderate exposure. But the one you're talking about, more than likely, I wanted that foreground area where the rocks were to be perfectly exposed. So I took a meter reading on that, and then I either used my own experience or I used bracketing to make that happen. Does that answer your question? Yep.
It does. Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thad.
Anybody else? Yes.
So, no, I would like to, unless there's any more questions, I wanted to thank you very much. First of all, you take beautiful pictures. So they're really wonderful, wonderful examples. It's great to see them.
Images.
In the chat window, I'm going to put Thad's contact information because I'm going to try to do that. well, maybe I'm not doing, it's up at the
Yeah,
top.
or I can put my ad. You want me to do that, Tildy?
Yeah, go ahead. And we will be sending out a link to wherever we post this on our website. Barbara Penn, I also want to thank you because you connected us with Thad last year. And what, a wonderful teacher and resource for these powerful cameras that we have that are all these features we're not using all the time. So the next workshop.
So I want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Thad. No, you go.
No, you finish up.
I'm just
So
gonna say
I
the
will.
next workshop is in July on the 11th, and that's going to be on composition. So, Thad, go ahead.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the chat button now. So I've included my email address, my cell phone number, and my website. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me by either email or by phone. And I write a blog on my website every now and then. It takes me a lot of time to develop them, but there are two very interesting blogs, in my opinion, on my website. So there you go. So you could please feel free to reach out to me. So did everybody get that or not? No, I just realized
I got it.
Not yet.
Oh, you did not get it, or you did?
I
I
did
don't
not.
think you did because I had the setting.
I
Everyone get
haven't
it?
gotten it yet.
No. All right, you know why I had it
No.
set privately. There you go. Now
There it
everybody's
is.
going to get it. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I
All right,
see
so
it.
then in a couple of weeks, we're going to do composition. I'm going to be hopefully figuring this out, walking
That'd be
around with my iPad and showing you how to compose pictures, and we'll have fun doing that.
Erica, did you have your
Thank you.
hand up?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bravo.
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to find the chat, but I found it.
No
Thank
problem. And
Thanks,
the great
Thad.
thing is,
Thank you.
photography is something everybody can do
Thank
even with social distancing. So it's pretty cool. Thank you very much.
Yes, you can. Yep. Thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank
Yeah, you too.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for your time.
Thanks a lot.